Hi, everyone. Thanks for checking out the second webinar in this webinar series. In this webinar, we'll be talking about intermittent fasting for weight management in elite athletes. My name is Allie Lears. I'm a graduate student at Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. I did my graduate capstone research on weight management practices in elite athletes. So, in this webinar, I'll just be sharing what research is out there surrounding intermittent fasting in athlete populations. To get started, we have our learning objectives. Objective one will be able to define intermittent fasting in terms of weight management. Objective two, be aware of the research that is currently available on the use of intermittent fasting to assist with weight loss and weight maintenance. And objective three, understand the impact intermittent fasting can have on body composition and athletic performance. So I'm sure you've heard of what intermittent fasting is, but just to get a clear definition of it, it is a diet characterized by having scheduled periods for eating and scheduled periods for fasting, so not eating. There's various types of intermittent fasting, ranging all the way from what's called total alternate day fasting, which is where one alternates between fasting days and feasting days, to what's known as time restricted feeding, where daily food intake is consumed in a narrow time window, with the rest of the hours in the day being a fasting period. So it's pretty common to fast for at least 12 hours in a day. A common dietary pattern for intermittent fasting is what's known as a 16-8. So 16 hours are dedicated to fasting, and 8 hours of the day are dedicated to feasting. So you'll see in the research studies we're about to discuss that each of these studies followed a 16-8 intermittent dietary pattern. So, the whole reason behind intermittent fasting is that the goal is to achieve what's known as the metabolic switch. This is where one's body has used all its glucose stores and instead turns to burning the fat and muscle stores in the body for energy. To start, we're going to look at the research on intermittent fasting for weight loss. So, there's only one study that has been published looking at the athlete population. This study was published in 2020 by Stratton and colleagues. So, they looked at 26 recreationally active males, and they looked at differences in body composition and muscular performance after following either a 16-8 intermittent fasting dietary pattern or just a normal meal distribution. So, again, participants were designated to either of these groups, and the study spanned over 6 weeks. So, the actual diet intervention period, though, was only 4 weeks. The first and last week of the study were just testing weeks. Both groups followed a calorie deficit. So in their intake was about 75% of what they needed to maintain their weight. For body composition and performance, they were measured again at the beginning and end. Performance was measured via vertical jump test and then an estimated one repetition maximum for bench press and leg press. They also did a muscular endurance press for one repetition maximum until failure for those two exercises. They also did several questionnaires throughout their time following the diets, and these questionnaires were just used to assess perceived recovery, their energy, desire to eat, things like hunger, fullness, and even motivation to do physical tasks. So, researchers found that the 16 hours fasting, 8 hours feeding intermittent fasting strategy did not affect these participants' fat free mass or compromise improvements in their muscular strength and power. Participants also following that 16-8 intermittent fasting strategy did not have different perceived recovery or perceived readiness for training compared to the normal diet distribution group. Also, the 16-8 intermittent fasting strategy did not significantly impact participants' fullness, desire to eat, feelings of energy, and motivation to perform physical tasks compared to the normal dietary strategy group. However, although all these 3 points are pretty positive in favor of that intermittent fasting, The researchers of this study did conclude that a short term intermittent fasting strategy did not produce more favorable results in body composition when compared to the normal meal distribution. So that takes us to our key takeaways of intermittent fasting for weight loss. So, again, there's not much research out there on how a hypocaloric intermittent fasting dietary strategy can affect athletes' body composition and performance. Again, that hypocaloric just meaning below what someone needs for calories to maintain one's body weight. I also want to point out that with fasting comes what's called decreased muscle protein synthesis. So, usually our muscle protein synthesis and our muscle protein breakdown are about even. However, fasting and energy restriction, which is happening when one tries to lose weight, is increased. So their muscle protein synthesis, or sorry, is decreased and their muscle protein breakdown is increased. So this could affect lean body mass. And again, although it wasn't found in Stratton's research study that we just looked at, we don't know what the long-term effects really could be. So again, although the study that we did look at demonstrated that that 16-8 intermittent fasting dietary pattern with the calorie deficit didn't have any negative impacts on body composition, it didn't actually elicit any more favorable outcomes than following a normal meal distribution would be. Next, we're going to shift our focus to look at the research on intermittent fasting for weight maintenance. So there's two studies that have been conducted. First, we're going to look at the study on the left. This was published in 2014 by Morrow and colleagues. So this study looked at resistance training and intermittent fasting in 34 healthy resistance trained men. So it contained an 8-week experimental period where the subjects were either assigned to this intermittent fasting group or the standard diet group. So following that normal meal distribution. So they weren't following any calorie deficit in this study. They were eating 100% of their needs. They had their body composition measured as well as strength. And strength was measured via, again, a 1 repetition maximum for bench press and leg press. So results of this study found that fat mass was significantly decreased in the 16-8 intermittent fasting group, while fat-free mass, so that lean body mass, was maintained in both the intermittent fasting group and normal diet group. Inflammation markers were lower in the intermittent fasting group compared to the normal diet group. However, the intermittent fasting group had reduced levels of testosterone. The next study we're going to look at is on the right hand side, and this was published in 2019 by Tinsley and colleagues. So, this study looked at intermittent fasting with supplementation of leucine. So, leucine is an important amino acid for increasing muscle protein synthesis. So, that's why researchers were curious in this. So, participants of this study were females, 40 active females. They were assigned to one of 3 groups. So it was either the control diet group, the intermittent fasting group, or the intermittent fasting group plus the leucine supplementation. Again, participants had their body composition measured as well as performance, and this performance was measured via counter movement jump, mechanized squat device, and a 1 repetition maximum and repetitions until failure for bench press and hip sled exercises. And these tests were conducted at the beginning of the study, the middle of the study, and then again at the end of the study. So researchers found that the 16-8 intermittent fasting group did not have impaired gains in fat-free mass, skeletal muscle gain, or muscular performance compared to the normal diet group. The 16-8 intermittent fasting dietary pattern also did not impact participants' metabolic rate, blood lipids, glucose, insulin, blood pressure, or cortisol levels. And although leucine is known for its ability to help stimulate that muscle protein synthesis, researchers did not find that supplementation of leucine during intermittent fasting had any distinct benefits. So I know I just threw a lot of information at you, so let's kind of compile that. So, from the research available, it does appear that a 16-8 intermittent fasting dietary pattern does not result in any negative effects on body composition or performance in active males and females. So, that's a good thing. Intermittent fasting can also help improve fat free mass, so that lean body mass, while decreasing fat mass during weight maintenance, which again is a positive thing. However, fasting can decrease that muscle protein synthesis. So, we definitely want to have higher protein intakes if we are following an intermittent fasting dietary strategy, because that's just going to help offset that muscle protein breakdown. However, although positive, things were found in both these studies, more research still is needed to really determine the long-term effects of how intermittent fasting would affect performance or even body composition in the athlete population. So, putting it all together now, an intermittent fasting dietary strategy like that 16 hours fasting, 8 hours feasting may be useful to help lose fat mass without compromising one's muscular strength or power. Again, high protein intake is needed to offset that muscle protein breakdown, just because fasting, and even if we're restricting energy intake for weight loss, can, decrease that muscle protein synthesis. Research still on intermittent fasting in athletes is minimal. So we want to kind of proceed with caution going into this diet, just because we don't know the long-term effects. And again, I want to point out this last point. Intermittent fasting likely does not produce more beneficial outcomes regarding body composition and performance than following a normal diet distribution would. So that's really important to kind of think on, because fasting for 16 hours at a time is long. And with only 8 hours in the day for feeding, some people's schedules don't allow that. It also might trigger extreme cravings or low energy. So I think it is important things to think about, when thinking if intermittent fasting is for you. And that's what takes us into our next slide. So, these important considerations to know before starting intermittent fasting. So, again, fasting impairs the body's ability to build muscle, and it can ultimately impact your lean body mass. A diet strategy like intermittent fasting can lead to low energy, fatigue, or extreme cravings, all which could affect your performance in a negative way. Also, intermittent fasting is not for everyone. It's those small windows of time for eating. So, if you have a super busy day, with practice, training, all that, and those fall where your, 8 hour feeding time would be, it might not be possible to get all the calories you need in that short time. And then following an eating pattern like intermittent fasting could lead to disordered eating. And especially if you've had a past of disordered eating, it's recommended to stay away from intermittent fasting. And as always, discuss your weight management plan with your sports dietitian, especially before, wanting to start intermittent fasting, because it is a pretty restrictive diet that, if followed wrong, could lead to negative impacts on body composition and performance. As always, if you have any questions, please contact me through my email. It's addison.lears99@gmail.com. And then here is my reference page. If you want to do some digging on how these research studies were conducted, just follow those links. And then we have our webinar assessment tool. So press pause when you are ready. You can jot down your answers to these 4 questions. Once you're ready, then hit play and it will take you to the end of the webinar, which will end on the webinar assessment tool answer key. Have a great rest of your day, and don't forget to tune in for the next webinar, which is discussing the Mediterranean diet.